Nick, do you remember how you got the part to be a Dalek?
I was hoping you would ask me that. I worked with Richard up north in Rep. So when Richard became a director, I suddenly got a 6-week contract and turned up to do the filming on a Sunday, for which we were paid £25. That's on a Sunday. And I said to Richard, thank you so much. 6-week contract. I don't know what Dalek is. And Richard said, we picked you because you're so small, you can get into one of those. But, one just got on with it and did it. I've more or less forgiven him, but no, we had a good time.
Richard, talking about this Nick's size, and so were the Daleks quite difficult to direct and to find actors to play them?
Yeah, well, Nick was kid. I mean, you had to be an actor. You couldn't be just some sort of idiot pushing an internalised wheelbarrow about. It was quite a skill, wasn't it, Nick?
Well, it was.
A skilled
they
thing.
did try.
And also a puppeteer, you see. You had to do all this as well, didn't you?
Yes, you tried it with crew members, didn't you, at first?
Yeah.
And they couldn't do it, so you had to employ...
No. I tried you, and the voices, and you have to work with the voices, with Peter and with Graham, David Graham. So it was quite complicated, and Nick I'd met in Cleethorpes, and then one other, I've forgotten his name now.
Derek?
No, not Derek.
Kevin Manson?
Kevin, I hadn't worked for.
Michael?
Anyway, I'd worked with him, whoever he was. I remember him as a director at Guildford before I went into the BBC. And I knew that they could do it, and it wasn't very glamorous, I'm sorry, Nick, but it was very necessary, and you did a splendid job.
We did get paid, Richard.
And they got paid.
Yeah.
Hey!
£27.50 a week.
It's a fortune.
And £25 on Sunday for filming.
It's probably more than I got as a staff director.
Oh!
What are your memories of the locations? Because the locations used in Dalek Invasion of Earth are so iconic and so well remembered by everyone here today. What are your memories?
I expect everyone knows as much about Daleks as I do, really. I mean, for a start, when we first started being Daleks, we had pedals to make them move. It was bicycle pedals. And then we had a stick up here to guide the wheels, and we had to be put in them. They were very heavy. So when we were on location in, say, Trafalgar Square, we were put in, we had to put our electrics in, and we had the eye, and we had the gun with the sparks here, but we couldn't get out.
Very
we were
rude
stuck.
gestures here.
Oh, very, yes. I specialise in rude gestures. And so, if you wanted to pee, there was nothing you can do about it. But fortunately, I came across a grating in Trafalgar Square and edged myself over it, and with great difficulty managed to relieve myself. When I moved away, I found there was a line of Daleks behind me waiting to use the grating.
There's a blue plaque there now commemorating that.
I put it there.
Richard, some of the scenes you came up with, some of the shots, really, really iconic, especially with the Daleks going over Westminster Bridge. Was that something that just happened as you got there, or did you plan to do that?
No, we planned it. As Nick said, it was Sunday, and it was very, very early, and you couldn't do it now. I think I've told you this before, but in those days, Trafalgar Square at 4 o'clock in the morning, just as the sun came up, was more or less empty. There was a group of hippies with a few guitars, and we had to bribe them with the odd fiver and kick them out of the shot. But the traffic hadn't started. So it was very necessary to have these rather cumbersome-looking things, the Daleks, looking if though they owned the place. So it wasn't any good to have a number 28 bus piddling around the back there. So that's what we did, and we couldn't do it now. And we planned it on a running thing: Trafalgar Square, then
Westminster Bridge.
Well, up the Mall.
Up the Mall.
And Westminster Bridge, and I'm afraid I stuck a censored thing on the cenotaph, which I didn't, being a young and pushy and probably pretty ignorant director, I didn't think was quite as important. I don't think I'd have dared do it now. I'd known I would have got arrested, you know. But I said, well, look, you know, that white thing over there, stick censored on it, will you? As we and my PA sweetly did, and then tore it down quickly before we were working in the back of from the back of a big Volvo. And all those running shots were taken from the back of the Volvo with me sort of lying behind the director and the sound man holding the boom out. And then we arrived at Westminster Bridge, and we just got that shot in, and I was absolutely determined to get it in. But the police started to arrive and said, and we're not going to hold up the traffic, you know, the first, whatever the bus was that comes across it is due now. And we had to let one go. I took it once. Kevin, who hates my guts for this, because they were heavy and they were dangerous, and I wanted it to come fast. The whole problem with Daleks is they were it was to make them look dangerous, and they were pretty silly. They were pepper pots, you know, give them a quick kick and they fell over. So you had to make them look dangerous, which is why I put them on tricycles, which is what Nick was talking about. The earlier ones were just just on the floor. But those were on tricycles, and they were heavy, and Kevin hated my guts and still hates my guts if he's still alive. He's in Australia now. And I read an article condemning me as a stupid young director for having got, but we got the shot, and it was going, how fast was it? I got them going a good 20 miles an hour over that bridge, I think, on that slope down. Yeah. And there were half a dozen people past the camera to hold them, to stop them falling over, because they were well out of control. But they had that necessary moment of gravitas. The failure, I think, from my point of view, Trafalgar Square was a success, and Westminster Bridge undoubtedly, and the Cenotaph a success. But then we moved to outside the Albert Hall, and I did a little bit outside the Albert Hall, and people were starting to arrive, American tourists, asking us what it was all about and everything. And so we decamped across to the Albert Memorial, and I put them up on those plinths, you know, the Albert Memorial is about a sort of, I put them on the third plinth up, I think. Well, actually, they looked silly, because there's no way could I show how they could go up and down, which was the problem with Daleks. They were meant to have a force field, so get the edge. I mean, that was the shot which would have really sold it, which we couldn't do. Get to the edge of something, a cliff, or even the edge of the Albert Memorial, and go straight off and down, and pick up on something else and go off. That they can do that now. They can do that electronically. Lucky buggers, we couldn't. We'd have had a dead Nick.
Yes, because you were on children's money, weren't you? Because it was children's television. So you have very little money, which shows how much more clever you were. Now they've got millions of pounds, haven't they?
Yeah.
And of course it's a big business. But then you had to be inventive.
Yes, he wasn't we were not much. The children's department was separate from drama, if you remember. And children's department, once they saw it, wanted to own it.
Yes.
And they were fairly beastly. There was a lot of infighting about how they should control it, and how it was for children and certain things shouldn't be there, and blah blah blah. And of course, once it became established, it became a family thing, and there was no more argument, and we were able to do a little more. You still couldn't swear. No, naughty words weren't on the BBC. Not for many a year.
No, my point was that you didn't have much money.
No, we didn't have much. It was from the serials department, but that was a very skint operation. It was very short of money all the time.
Going up ramps, you were talking about, we couldn't go upstairs or anything. Going up ramps, you used to have small people behind, pushing, making sure they weren't in camp.
I just want to ask Kevin a question. Kevin, when you did 30 Years in the TARDIS, you actually recreated the shots over Westminster Bridge, didn't you?
Yeah.
How did you find doing that? Did you struggle to do that like Richard did?
Well, I don't know whether Richard had a PA
Sure.
who sorted it all out.
Oh,
But
it does.
I had a PA who was on her last job at the BBC, so she had a contacts sort of list that was to die for, you know. She knew who to contact and everything. It was a nightmare organising two different councils on opposite ends of Westminster Bridge.
Oh yes, that's absolutely right.
And on the very weekend that we wanted to film 30 Years in the TARDIS, County Hall was sold to a Japanese company. And we had to get permission from them to be on the embankment outside County Hall, which was all fine. The only problem was there was one guy who was particularly dodgy and a bit iffy about it all and didn't like the idea of us doing it and reluctantly allowed us to...
On which council was he? Or was
well,
he?
even on the south side, so maybe it was Southwark, I'm not sure. But
Yeah, probably
I
Southwark.
just remember him being a bit awkward. And
Yeah.
on the day when we arrived, I sent him a map of where we were going to put the TARDIS and where the Daleks were going to be and everything. And on the day we arrived, right where we were going to put the TARDIS, a little van pulled up and dug up a manhole and put a little fence around it and all that. And then they buggered off for breakfast and we never saw them again. So
So
I think they did it on purpose just
it
to
was that
spoil
man,
our
was it?
shot.
Yeah.
But I did do it as a fan. I did it in 1978 with one Dalek, and we took it down Downing Street and nearly got arrested. There was a grey-haired man stuck his head out the door. We've always fantasised that it was actually Jim Callahan. So what the hell is going on? The policeman wasn't out on duty.
You took it down
down
Downing Street without asking permission.
Yeah, and a policeman was sitting in the car and he got out and put his hat on and there was a, "What are you doing?" And I thumbed over my shoulder, I was carrying the camera, and I said, "It's a Dalek." He goes, "I know what it is. What do you want to do then?" And he referred us to Old Scotland Yard.
Did you get your shot?
No, we got some other shots down at the end when he wasn't looking. But
Yeah.
a Japanese tourist stopped and took a load of pictures, jumped in a taxi and drove off. He couldn't possibly have known what it was. But it was fun. And it was all really in honour of your programme because that's one of my favourite episodes ever.
Well, good. I mean, it lives on then in your genius.
Were you the first director, Richard?
No. Waris Hussain was a very good
Oh,
director.
Boris Hussain, yeah.
And then Chris and I did the second thing, which was
Chris Barry,
Yes,
yeah.
Chris Barry. And Chris at the time was dying to get it off and do something else. He'd already got something on the filming down in Cornwall or Devon, and so he did the first three, and then I took over from him.
Right.
That was the first Dalek serial. On one side, done it. Then I became the Dalek director for a year and a half.
Nick, you said about having to pull up to a grate to
Yep.
go to toilets. Were there any other difficulties you encountered in the Dalek prop, and any of the other operators encounter any problems?
Well, so often you would come to a break, lunch, coffee or whatever, and people would just go away, and there was no one there to take you out. And someone going, "Can you help me out, please?" You know, trying to get out because it was so heavy, and we had to be unlocked and everything. But there was another time when we were streaming out of a building, which was down a ramp and through an archway, and they hadn't realised just how broad the Daleks were, and we all hit the side. So we had to stop, and I think they had to enlarge the archway that we went through. And of course, that held up production for a while. What else?
We had them. You weren't. We had them. I had them coming out of a spaceship.
That was the one I'm
At
thinking of.
Riverside.
But we did bang into the side.
And yes, and it came down and it hit the camera. So we, you know, it was a war between the cameras, which were not the light little thing you're working on now. It's a great big hefty black and white camera, and this Dalek couldn't stop. You weren't in it, were you?
No. No, that's not me. Not guilty. Yeah. And there was someone who dropped William, wasn't
Yeah.
there?
Oh, yeah.
A Cyberman.
Yes.
Or a Robo-Man.
Richard McNeef was his name, and he had to come running down the ramp
Yeah.
ahead of the Dalek. And when he hit you know how it is when you run downhill, and he was suddenly carrying this old man. So he was twice the weight he was normally. So he hit the bottom of the ramp, and his knees wouldn't hold it. So his knees folded, and he dropped poor old Billy Hartnell on the floor. I think into the base of a camera. And Willie had to go to hospital.
It was very dramatic.
It nearly had no Doctor Who.
Oh, gosh. Richard, you were involved in Doctor Who quite early on at the start, with being involved in the second story with the Daleks, the first Dalek story. What do you think is the reason for Doctor Who's popularity?
Well, it's unique, and it certainly was unique then, and because they've up-tempoed it and reinvented it, really, no less, it is still a unique piece of storytelling. At the time, there was no attempt to do science fiction. There was, except for the Quatermass experiment. It was the only thing that television had done, which was about, which was science fiction, science fantasy, almost. So that was the reason why it was something new, and because it wasn't within the slightly castrated children's department, it could be more daring, more aggressive, and more freer. So it immediately became a family viewing, and not just for children.
I think the Daleks, because they weren't people, they were from another planet. So there was no way of knowing how they were going to behave, what they were going to do, what their reasons were for invading the Earth, other than to take over. Even when we were outside the Albert Hall, we were doing this, weren't we, like the Nazi salute? Yeah. So
yes, we were trying to link it.
Yes,
yeah.
Oh yes, we got that. Yes, we got that.
And that feeling of hysteria, which I was very keen on, and both Peter and David took up in the voice, this feeling that they were in fact, although very powerful technologically, that within their suits they were actually blobs of useless jelly. And so they were highly developed mentally, but that their physicality had disappeared and become just this awful pepper pot of electronics, and that this made them in fact on the edge of hysteria all the time, feeling that they weren't going to manage. And that I think it shows in the voice, don't you?
Yes, I'm sure.
That sort of feeling of, we've got to do something, destroy. The repetition came out of that, It wasn't anybody who was quite quietly in command and say, take him and shoot him, It was always, yes, on the edge of some sort of catastrophe, which they were. The idea which we developed or held very strongly onto was that they had buggered up their planet, and they were now looking for some other place in which they could reinvent themselves.
Nick,
yes.
Not only did you play a Dalek, but you played, am I right in saying, the Slyther?
Oh, the Slyther, yes.
What are your memories of the Slyther costume?
Well, it's very rubbery and lots of things hanging from it. And the nicest thing about the Slyther, that he hung around corners and throbbed. Yes. There was a gag going round that he was actually the Dalek's bit of stuff on the side. Because no, not at all. But when the Slyther went out, I had the Daily Mail on to me, and they were round at the house saying, well, do you want to tell us about the Slyther? And I said, well, I don't know what to tell you. They said, have you got any photographs? I said, no, but I can draw it for you. So I drew this sack with things sort of dangling off it. He was Australian. And he said, oh, yes, I'll buy that. Now then, how can we angle this story? Do you have any children? I said, no, not at the moment. Have you got any animals? I said, no. And he looked round the walls of my house and he said, I'll see you're into art. And what he did was to take me out into the garden and take lots of photographs of me jumping around, being young, and pretty adorable, and smoking a cigarette, smoke coming out of the nose and looking sinister. And that went into it must have been a slow news week.
Do you have a copy of the article?
Yes, got it here.
Wow. Fantastic. So were you paid twice for having 2 parts?
Oh no. But there was one nice day when I was changing into the Slyther. I was in the wardrobe and the monitors were on and we were seeing what was happening on stage. And the Robo-men got very cross with the Daleks. And they were throwing the Dalek up in the air, and giving it a bad time. They were very cross. And there's one rather camp dresser said to another, "Oh, look, oh, ow, what's going on there?" And the other one said, "I don't know. Perhaps it's its birthday."
Richard, before I open the questions up to the audience, how do you, as a director, approach casting?
Yes, I'd be interested to hear that.
Small, size first of all. Size all important. Talent totally unimportant.
Oh yes, little old cute. No,
the reverse is true. The talent, the innate ability to encapsulate the emotion of the character as written or as envisaged is the quintessence of casting. Size, almost certain things are important. Obviously, if they're very active, they can't be too wimpish, or if it's very wimpish, they can't be too active. But the idea of just casting, for example, a beautiful woman because she's beautiful, is to me obscene. You look at the part and what it needs in its dramatic entirety, and you look actually at the most stressful moments in it, because drama is conflict. It isn't people, despite if you ever unfortunate to have to watch Home and Away with people agreeing with it, sitting on a sofa agreeing with each other, that's not drama. Drama is people basically in some sort of conflict, either with authority or with themselves or the church or whatever it is. And that conflict produces emotions. And it is the act, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely.
Of the actor to be able to find within themselves that emotion. So when I did casting sessions when I was a director, I would always look and talk to the person and try to pull from them their emotional responses, how they reacted to this sort of thing, how they could react to it. As well, you don't just slap a piece of paper in their hand and say, read that. That's not casting. You actually try to get inside the person and see what they're capable of. That's how I do. That's how I did.
I'm sure there are lots of directors out there who could learn from that. On that note, I will open it up to the audience. Do anybody have any questions for our guests? Yeah.
I just wondered, we've all heard lots of stories about William Hartnell. I wonder what your take, or individual take on him as an actor,
You have to speak up because I'm deaf.
what were your kind of memories and William Hartnell?
Yeah.
What were your memories of William Hartnell?
My memories of Billy, because he was a real old pro. He'd learnt his business the hard way. He used to do quickies during the war, which is very similar, funnily enough, to the multi-camera studios that we worked in, because they would, rather than stop and have to reposition everything and start again, he would play a whole scene inside a house, and they'd have built the doorway where he has to be shot or call the cat or whatever it is, and so he'd say, I never want to see you again, as long as I live, and he'd walk out and slam the door, and there'd be another camera there, And so he'd immediately be shot or call them. So he was able to keep going, and keep going is what Billy did, and he did it brilliantly. And on some occasions, he had some very funny stories. He was making a film for the war effort, and he had to be a pilot. And they had I think it was a Spit. Yeah, it was a Spitfire out on the tarmac. They said, climb into that and drive, just take it into the hangar. What? Yeah, here's the accelerator, and there's it, so you do that, and a bit like that. Off you go. I think he had one sort of, rough feeling for it, and they were in a hell of a hurry, and they were very short of film. Very short of film. You couldn't get film during the war. So he had to get it going, and he had to do it. And of course, when you're nervous, you overdo everything. So he revved like hell, the bloody thing nearly took off. He headed straight for the hangar, went straight through the hangars were, those dome-like things with great big curtains of canvas. And he went in the open side and came out the closed side. Oh. So they had to rebuild some of that hangar, and probably one or two of the bits of the aircraft as well. He was very bad-tempered, if he wanted to be. And I'm afraid to say that he was also fairly colour prejudiced. And I had to talk him down and talk him through, because he knew he shouldn't be. It's sweet, really, because I'd see him, sort of edge away from there was a lovely Nigerian girl who used to serve us coffee, and he couldn't get himself to be polite to them. And then he'd apologise to me for it. He'd say, I shouldn't be feeling that. I shouldn't be feeling that. Should I, Richard? I shouldn't, but he did. But by the time he was working with us, he was already just starting to get that hardening of the archery as that thing that finally killed him, which is one of the things why he had this edge of anger. But the edge of anger makes a good actor.
Exactly what you wanted, yeah.
You need anybody who's placid, amoeba-like, is not going to actually have that moment of danger. And the moment of danger Bill was very good at.
Because he was a film star, wasn't he?
Yeah, film star.
Yeah, I liked it because when he was rehearsing, I don't know whether you remember, he liked to have his name on the back of his chair. And Bernard tells a lovely story, Bernard Kay, of getting the prop man to put all our names on the backs of chairs in the rehearsal room, and William didn't like it. He wasn't pleased at all. But I thought it was a great guy.
I didn't know that.
Oh yes, yeah.
See, when you're busy directing, all the fun, it goes out, all the nice fun things that the actors get up to, you haven't time for.